Welcome to this online lesson asking the question, why was Charles I executed? The aims of this lesson are to know why Charles I was executed, to explain Parliament's reasons to execute Charles, and to evaluate the decision to execute Charles. In other words, decide whether it was the right or wrong call. Here's a do now question to get you started. What reasons can you think of that explain why Parliament won the English Civil War? If you haven't done my lessons on the English Civil War before this point, and if you've got no knowledge of the English Civil War, it will be well worth knowing that first before you proceed with this, which effectively ends it. Pause the video here while you complete that task and while you note down today's title. Okay, so there are lots of reasons why Parliament won, and we'll consider some of them now. Let's have a look at how the war progressed. The Battle of Edge Hill in October 1642 was indecisive, with neither side being able to beat the other. Therefore, areas of the country were pretty well split down the middle. The red areas represent areas controlled by the forces of Charles I. The areas in that sort of yellow-greeny colour were controlled by the armies of Parliament. And as you can see, it is a fairly even split. But that changed in June 1643 with the King's victory at Walton Moor. Here we can see that the King was able to expand his influence in the north. Also, at the Battle of Stratton or Stamford Hill in Cornwall, the King was able to vastly expand his control of the West Country. But he wasn't going to have it his own way throughout. After the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644, Parliament recaptured control of the north of England. The King was losing his influence. And after the Battle of Naseby in 1645, in which the King's main army was destroyed, he was only just hanging on to control of the southwest, parts of North Wales, and around his headquarters in Oxford. So clearly, by 1645, the writing was on the wall for the King. But the war didn't end immediately. Parliament's victory. Write this as a subheading now. Although the war dragged on for a few more years, the last major battle was at Naseby in 1645. Here the King's army was utterly crushed. The King was captured and tried to raise another army for another war. Unfortunately for Charles, he lost again. Now Parliament plotted its revenge. What do you think Parliament's options might be? Complete these tasks. Think back to earlier lessons or your existing knowledge on the English Civil War, especially with that relating to the final battles. Why was Charles never likely to win a second war? Secondly, what options might Parliament have of what to do with Charles now that he was their prisoner? And lastly, why, initially, might execution have seemed like an unlikely solution to Parliament's problem of what to do with the King? Pause the video here and answer those questions. Press play when you're ready to continue. Well, let's have a look then. Charles was not likely to win a second war because his army had been crushed at Naseby. This was his experienced, well-trained and well-equipped army. Such a thing is not easy to just form again. Most of his armies in the Second Civil War were far less experienced and of a far lower quality. Parliament's army, on the other hand, was only getting better and better. So what options did Parliament have? Well, one option was simply killing the King. Ultimately, it's not too much of a spoiler to tell you that that's exactly what they did do, but it might not have been obvious. Other options would be to keep him under house arrest. Another option might be simply to forgive him and allow him to carry on as king, but perhaps he had agreed to new terms of control and cede more power to Parliament. Or perhaps another option might be to exile the king, force him to live abroad. But, initially, why might execution have seemed so unlikely? Well, don't take for granted that so many people, including on Parliament's side, saw that the King was God's anointed representative on earth and in the way that God had appointed him as king and no one could argue with him. This is an idea known as the divine right of kings, and it was a very powerful one that had been for quite long lasting. England had had a king for as long as anybody could remember, or virtually for as long as anybody could study the history of the kingdom. To get rid of an anointed king, well, surely that would be the highest treason that it's possible to commit. And even many on Parliament's side were wary of doing just that. So, to kill a king, or rather to imprison him, or exile him. We do now know that Parliament executed him, but it was not a straightforward decision. Let's consider why. Parliament accused Charles I of the crime of treason. Normally, this was a crime against the king, but Parliament said that in this case it was a crime against the country itself, and they justified this on the following means. Firstly, the 2 civil wars caused by Charles, and the actions of his men during them. That's not to say that Parliament's men were at all innocent during these wars, but I'm afraid for Charles, they were on the winning side. Also, Parliament pointed to his unfair rule during what they called the 11-year tyranny, during which Charles had dismissed Parliament entirely. Also, they pointed to his religious beliefs. Although Charles claimed to be a Protestant, and very likely was, he did like some Catholic ways of doing things. Many of Parliament's most extreme supporters were Puritans. They wanted to get rid of any Catholic influence on Christian religion in England at all. The fact that Charles was married to a Catholic hardly helped. So the punishment for treason was death. What should Parliament do? Complete these tasks. Explain why Parliament had to change the definition of treason in order to put Charles on trial. Why do you think Parliament felt that this was necessary? And then as an extension, even some parliamentarians were uncomfortable with the idea of putting the king on trial for treason. Why might this have been? Pause the video here and explain your answers. So, Parliament had to change the definition of treason because previously treason had been a crime against the king. You could hardly say that the king had committed a crime against himself, so instead they made it a crime against the country or kingdom. That meant that they could accuse Charles. So why was Charles seeing this as necessary? Well, as I've just said, Charles could hardly be put on trial against having committed a crime against himself. By making treason a crime against the kingdom, Charles and his men could be held accountable for what had happened during the war. With the extension, you may have given a similar answer in our previous activities. However, it's worth really considering this. The idea of beheading someone that many people, including on Parliament's side, had seen as being appointed by God, having been chosen by God himself, was seen as a very, very sinful act indeed. So people were incredibly uncomfortable, often, with the idea of killing the king. We're going to consider the trial of Charles I now. To do this, I've posted a couple of links in the description to this video. Have a look at that first link. It will direct you towards about a 6-minute clip from an old 1980s TV drama called By the Sword Divided. Okay, it might be a little bit old this, but it's quite well produced, and quite crucially, the writers of this have really closely looked at the real history, so we can use it as a useful source to learn about what happened to Charles at his trial. Watch the first clip linked in the description carefully, and then complete these tasks. Have you watched the clip? Okay, if not, pause the video now, open up a new window and watch it. Done? Well, hopefully you found that interesting and entertaining. Even if you didn't, let's have a look at these questions. Describe how the crowd reacted during the trial. If you can't remember, rewatch it. What does Charles seem to think about being on trial? And then when you've done that, we're going to consider the video as a source. The first part of the clip, the bit in the courtroom with Charles giving his defence, is likely to be based upon records of what was really said in the trial. I've seen this presented in various ways, and the words are almost exactly the same, so the writers must have got it from somewhere. Explain why this might make this, as a source, more accurate for the historian. And then lastly, what aspects of the clip are likely to have been changed or made up to tell the story or make it more entertaining for the audience? This is a crucial part of considering the purpose of these sources when we use them. Explain why your chosen part or parts of the video are likely to have been made up or changed. Pause the video while you answer these questions, and if you're struggling to do so, remember you can re-watch the clip again if you need to. Hopefully we picked up that the crowd reacted in a sort of shocked manner, gasping at the way that people were reacting to the king and accusing him of the crime of treason. Indeed, there are reports of this that survive from the time. Charles clearly thinks that the court has got no authority to even put him on trial at all, let alone convince him of treason. So what about the clip itself? Is it an accurate source? Well, it is likely that a court and would take very detailed and accurate notes of exactly what is said during the trial. This was crucial for gathering the evidence, even in something of a show trial like Charles got. This makes it very likely that the video is based upon the surviving records from the actual court case. And so as far as those records are accurate, the video is probably pretty accurate as well. But what might have been changed? Well, personally, I'm a little bit suspicious about the bit afterwards. That big-nosed man storming around and shouting at people is supposed to represent Oliver Cromwell. There's very likely no record of Cromwell having that conversation with people backstage. But of course, such a conversation could have happened, and it helps tell the story. Now we're going to have a look at the evidence on each side in the trial of Charles I. Firstly, you need to create a table like this. On one side, you're going to write statements defending Charles. These are the ones that suggest he doesn't deserve to die. Then on the other side, you're going to write down statements accusing Charles, suggesting that he does deserve to die. In a moment, I'll give you what those statements are, but for now, pause the video while you create your table. Done? Let's have a look at how you're going to use this table. Task number 1 is going to be to write out the statements under the correct headings in your table. I'm going to give you the statements 3 at a time. Then, once you've written in the statements, write either agree by the examples you agree with, or disagree by any that you disagree with. So this might be based upon the fact that you think that they're untrue or perhaps unfair. Then, which statement, and this is I mean a single statement, do you find most convincing overall? Explain your choice. You'll only be able to do that when you've seen all 9 of the statements. And then which side do you agree with most overall? This is likely to be the side that's either got the most examples underneath it, or the ones that seems to have got the strongest examples underneath it. As there are 9, there will be an unbalance between them. So let's have a look at our first 3 statements. Remember to start by writing them under the correct headings, and then completing the other tasks. Statement number 1. By the way, I've written these in the first person, as if they're being read out in court. Parliament has no right to put the king on trial. He was made king by God. Only God can judge him. Where would you put that statement? Is that defending Charles or accusing Charles? Okay, I'll help you with the first one. This one is really defending Charles, saying that God would make a judgment of Charles and Parliament has no right to. So write that first one under defending Charles. Let's have a look at the next 2. You can do these yourself. It wasn't the king who started the war. Parliament did by refusing to do as the king asked. And then, Parliament didn't start the war. The king declared war on Parliament when he got rid of them for 11 years and only used them to raise taxes on the people of England. Okay, pause the video here and write in these next 2 statements under the headings you think they best fit under. Let's have a look at the next 3 statements. Again, you'll be writing these under the correct headings. As a soldier captured fighting in the new model army, I heard Charles tell one of his men, I do not care if you cut the prisoners 3 more times, for they are my enemies. Charles is responsible for the crimes of his men. I ask this court to be sensible. The war did no good. How can another death, the king's, do any good either? Does it not say in the Bible, thou shalt not kill? A woman called Elizabeth Styles was arrested just after the war ended, carrying this letter to Scotland. It is asking the Scots to invade England so Charles can become king again. Pause the video here and write these statements under the correct headings. Okay, our last 3 statements. I was there on January the 4th, 1642, when Charles marched into Parliament to arrest 5 members of Parliament. He lost his right to rule when he stopped listening to his people. The king was always kind and generous towards his servants, who all loved him. The king is just a man. He hasn't got God-given powers. He should be executed like any other murderer. All right, pause the video now and enter these last 3 statements under the correct headings. Done? Okay, remember now is your chance to answer parts 3 and 4. Which individual statement do you find most convincing overall? And explain your choice. And which side do you agree with most overall? Explain your choice for that as well. That will probably be helped if you've done the second task, which is write agree next to ones that you think are correct and disagree with next to ones that you doubt or that you don't think are fair. Pause the video while you complete the last 2 tasks and then we'll move on to the next answer. By doing that task, you should have gathered evidence as to the reasons why Parliament ended up killing Charles, and also the reasons why some people disagreed with this. We're now going to consider the execution itself, and we're going to watch another video source for this. I've put another clip link in the description, and you should prepare to watch this now. It should be said that the sound is a little bit quiet in this clip, so you may need to turn your speakers up. I will point out as well that I've deliberately chosen this as it's quite an accurate representation of what happened to the king, but not perfectly so. Also, I didn't want to show you anything too gory. You should be able to cope with this, but if you are a bit squeamish, there is a very brief splash of blood and you do see the king's head fall off through a gap in the scaffold. So you don't see it in any great detail, there's just the suggestion of what's happened. If you'd rather not watch that, fair enough, you can skip this bit, but I think most of you should be able to cope. So, pause the video here and watch the video that I've linked. Alright, like the last one, the first part is probably the most accurate in terms of the words spoken, whereas the second bit probably has a bit more artistic license. Here are your tasks. Firstly, describe how the crowd reacted to the execution of the king. You could include a quote of what is said. What argument does Cromwell at the end give for why Charles deserved to die? And then, compare this clip to the previous one. Again, part of it is based on the words really spoken at the time, mostly the last words that Charles speaks. Which film do you think is more historically accurate, which means realistic to what happened? Explain your choice. Pause the video here while you complete those tasks, and if you need to rewatch it again to get the answers, that's fine. You should have realised that a large part of the crowd reacted with horror and shock and gasped when the king was beheaded. One man even shouts out, "He was God on earth!" This is clearly a person who believes in the divine right of kings and the idea that Charles was chosen by God. So what argument does Cromwell give you for why Charles deserved to die? Well, a lot of it focuses on the idea that Charles was just a man and he really wasn't in a position to boss anyone else about. It's the argument that England would be more free without a tyrant king. So which film is more historically accurate? Well, part of that is going to be based upon personal taste, as I can tell you that the first half of both clips is pretty well based upon the exact words spoken at the time, as far as we can tell. But hopefully you've come up with some justification. For my part, I think probably narrowly the first one's more accurate. The idea that someone crawled underneath the scaffold I think is a bit of artistic licence, and the idea that Cromwell was somehow grandstanding in front of all of those people is also pretty unlikely. He would have been taking a serious risk exposing himself to a possibly angry crowd like that. We're now going to create a structured answer. This will be the longest task of this lesson. We're answering this question. Was Parliament justified, that means correct or right, in executing Charles I? I'm going to give you some help in terms of structuring your answer. You won't need to write headings like part 1, you don't even need to use a writing frame, but this should indicate to you the sections that you should include, and do aim to include them all. This will produce a structured piece of writing which shows both sides of the argument and your overall opinion. Part 1 should include this. Charles I was executed because, and I need you to give more than one reason there. Whether you agree with Charles's execution or not, you need to note down the reasons why Parliament did it. So have a look back at the evidence from the court case in your table earlier. Then part 2. These reasons explain why Charles was executed because, and again, explain how your chosen examples tell you why Charles was killed. Then part 3. However, not everyone thought it was right to kill Charles because, and again, give reasons. And again, part 4. These reasons suggest it was wrong to kill Charles because. Here you need to explain how your chosen examples tell you why some people felt it was wrong to kill the king. Part 5 is the beginning of your conclusion. Overall, I think it was or was not right to kill King Charles. Don't sit on the fence here. Choose one or the other. Even if it is close, you can say you only agree to a small extent, but you must come down one side or the other. An example that supports my answer is, this supports my opinion because. Give real explained reasons why you think what you think. And then the last bit of evaluation. The evidence better supports this point of view, in other words, your point of view, than the opposite point of view because. So if you think it was right to kill King Charles, explain why the examples you've backed up your answer with are stronger than the ones that suggest he should have lived. Or, if you think that Charles should have lived and been punished in some other way or not at all, explain why the examples that support that point of view are stronger than the examples that support the other side. I hope that's not been too confusing. Anyway, pause the video here. Again, use the writing frame if you feel that you need to, although you don't have to. But make sure you really justify whether Parliament was justified in executing King Charles. Best of luck. Done? Well, whatever answer you chose, Charles was executed, for better or worse. Let's do a quick grammar check and spelling check. Things that you can check in your answer are like these. Check the starts of sentences and names such as Charles and Cromwell. They should have capital letters. Check the ends of sentences for full stops. And have you used they, their and their correctly? Yeah, okay, they've got the same sound when I say them, but they mean very different things. The first there is they are. The next one is there as in belonging to them. And then there's there as in over there in terms of indicating a direction. Look for common errors like that. Now the spelling check. Check spelling of the following key words that you've probably used. Charles, again, check out the capital letter. Execution, people, believe, religion and parliament. Also, Cromwell is quite commonly misspelled. Then check for any other obvious errors and proofread your work. Make the corrections you need to make, and then when you're ready, you can move on. But while you make your checks, pause the video. Hopefully you've got a perfectly spelt and perfectly checked piece of work now. Well done. Finally, reactions to this event. People still can't agree. Much as I don't like scrolling through YouTube comments, I did find some interesting ones while I was researching this lesson. These are all real YouTube comments that were left underneath the video of Charles's execution. This YouTube user has said, after 10 years of the Commonwealth, they couldn't wait to get a king back. Well, maybe they've got a point. The Commonwealth was England under the rule of Cromwell. More on that in a future lesson. And they did indeed invite kings back with Charles II. Here's another view. Good riddance for the war criminal. Without the English Republic, this country would have been a bankrupt, priest-ridden hellhole. Save your compassion for the innocent people murdered by this man of blood or his agents in Birmingham, Bridgnorth and Leicester. Wow, quite an angry view there, but referring to real crimes that were committed during the Civil War. And lastly, this was a black day in the history of England. Clearly this user thinks that it was wrong to kill the king. But what do you think? Was the execution of Charles justice, or was it a dark day in history? No wrong answers, but write your own imaginary YouTube comment now. You can do this in your work, or if you're able to, you could even write it on this video. Pause the video while you do this. Done? Well, whatever you think, Charles was dead, and the Civil War was over. But that didn't mean that history wasn't going to have a few more twists and turns. After all, we've got a queen now, only she doesn't have the power that Charles I did. And indeed, no king or queen of England would ever have that power again. Hopefully you found this lesson interesting and useful. If you have and you're able to do so, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Many thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Goodbye.